We'll be back again, all of us. We've been fighting for the last 10, 12 years, and we'll continue to fight this campaign, because guess what? The whole House is united on this particular campaign, and I hope that we will get a positive news on our next meeting.
Yeah.
The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. Ayes have it. We now come to the debate on funding for the prevention of fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP for short. Sir Mike Penning to move the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased you pronounced it rather than me. So from now on, perhaps we'll just use FOP, which is what most people, including the families, but the scientists, don't. FOP is a genetic condition. It's not an illness, it's not a disease. All too often when this very rare condition is talked about, and it is very rare, 1 in a million. So in this country we have about 70 odd people alive that have FOP, and around about 30 young people and children. So if we replicate that around the world, it's a very rare condition. The condition is probably the biggest nightmare for any parents, anybody that loves a child. Let's give an example. If you bruise, I played rugby, I bruise very regularly. I stopped playing fairly recently, but when I did play rugby, I would bruise. If you have FOP, there's a good chance that that bruise will turn to bone. Skeletally, it will turn to bone. If you have an injection, most of us want our young children to be inoculated. We've been going through an inoculation process, which I was very much involved with in COVID. There's a good chance that that trauma will turn to bone. And I've circulated privately with the Minister on the front bench, including Mr Deputy Speaker's chair and others, some photographs of what this trauma can end up like and what does end like. And I got involved in this, Mr Deputy Speaker, when a couple came to see me in my constituency and said, look, and I can't, even this day as a dyslexic person, I've practiced and practiced, I can't do it. My daughter has got FOP. I had no idea what they were talking about. It's a bit like the previous debate, when we first heard about Primodos and the problems with Primodos. Most of us in this room had never heard of it. FOP is much rarer than the conditions we've been talking about, the victims of Primodos, or MESH, or Valparate, or any of those. But the effects on that individual and their family and loved ones is so profound that very often, when, as my constituent said to me, as a mum, she looked at her baby and she thought there was something wrong with her toes. The initial diagnosis from most paediatricians on that would be bunions. Bunions on a newborn baby. My wife's got bunions, but it's nothing to do with what she was born with. It's the quality of the shoes and things that she was wearing as a young lady. She won't mind me saying that because we've discussed this case before. And it's only sometimes if you can get in front of the right expert, you can get the diagnosis that you need for an incurable condition, completely incurable, progressive condition, that maybe you might find out what you've had. And that's the situation that happened with my constituents. There are 3 consultants in this country that have that capability, and they were lucky that they got in front of one, and I pay tribute to the Portland Hospital where the diagnosis took place. So what does this mean as a young person? And there's people in the gallery this evening, which I talk about as young people that have the condition, as well as, I think the little one's gone home now because I think she was rather tired, and she helped me deliver a letter to the Prime Minister at number 10 earlier on today. And what does it mean? It means that your whole life is difficult in that, do we want to wrap our children up in cotton wool? No, of course we don't. But Even if they've got FOP, do we want to wrap them up in cotton wool? No, we don't. But you have to be extremely careful about inoculations, bruising, sport, rough and tumble. My constituents are very, very lucky. I have a very forward-thinking planning department in my local authority that use the delegated powers that they had to grant planning concession on green belt that I fight to protect in my constituency, so a specialist house could be built for Lexi, so that she has the facilities where she can have the safe upbringing that she needs. Now, there were lots of people that were very worried about with permission being given in that sort of way, because the condition is so rare. I had people saying to me, are you really sure this baby's got this condition? Are they not just circumventing the planning? And it's only when I circulated some of the photographs, which many of colleagues have got in the house today, that people actually said to me, okay, we're actually, two of them said, we're really sorry, we get this. But because it's not visual, very often in the early stages, there is no understanding of, it's a bit like mental health condition. We've got much better ideas about mental health these days, but because when you walk up to someone, you don't know that they've got mental health. Well, a lot of you would not go up, if you went up to Lexi today, you would not know that she's got FOP, but you will do in the next few years. It's pretty obvious. The interesting thing about FOP, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is there is no set planned rule for it. In some progression, it progresses very fast, and the bone grows very quickly, and the effects on the skeleton and movement and mobility is very quick. And in others, you get short bursts of it. And then sometimes you have nothing for years, and then it will progress again. Now, the reason for this debate, and I apologise to the Minister because I spoke to him privately about this, I didn't want him on that bench. I wanted the Science Minister on the bench, and it's not personal, but this is not an NHS issue. It's a condition that needs scientific expertise in research and in trials, which is actually a Science Minister's portfolio. And I understand as soon as we start talking about anything to do with health, the Health Department go, that's ours. Well, on this particular case, it's like, I'll give way and then I'll make some progress.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and can I just say that I concur with his comments about this issue of research and health research, and there is a concern about how it's being handled. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention. Now, earlier on, Mr Deputy Speaker, we did have a short statement on Horizon, which was excellent because the Science Minister was on the bench, and I asked the Secretary of State a few questions around FOP, and of course he's agreed to meet us in short time. So the great news is we will meet the Science Minister. The key to what was announced earlier on is that before COVID, there was work being done, and there is work being done around the world on FOP, but there was funding from Horizon for trials on FOP. The big issue was COVID that interrupted the trials. It wasn't actually us leaving the EU, which I'm sure some colleagues will say, oh, that's what it's all about. No, it was nothing to do with that. It was actually COVID which actually affected it. So I'll put that on the record straight away. And now we have a great situation that Horizon is back on stream. But one of the reasons I would like to ask the Science Minister this question, perhaps the Minister's colleagues in his office can elaborate on this before I meet the Science Minister, is that the trials got halted because of COVID. Have we got to start from scratch again, or can we actually, in the trials terms, move on? Now, as I'm an old-fashioned, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I used to be called a Eurosceptic. We're now out of the European Union, so that's great. And of course, one of the things that they said, well, you don't want to cooperate with Europe. Of course, we want to cooperate with Europe. And the announcement today on the Horizon is a classic example. And a classic example of why we would have to collaborate, not just with Europe, but with America and other parts of the world, is because this condition is so rare. We could not do trials here. The scientists in America have got a much bigger base to it to be able to do trials. But actually, we need to learn from them and they need to learn from us. So it looks very sensible that we're going to be back in the European trials one, but what I'm petrified about is have we got to wait for Horizon to announce bidding on a certain part of the scientific research and then wait for a couple of years for that decision to be made, because that tends to happen with these projects, when we've already been in the middle of the project and in the middle of it already. In trying to work out what will be the best route forward, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a dad looking at this, if you know what I mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we need two things. There is research going on out there into how we prevent the progression of FOP and the bone structure within this, in the traumas. And actually, is there something we can turn off very early on? Is there research out there that can predict that you might actually... At the moment, there isn't, I understand. So we've got two sets of situations here. You've got, can we in some way look at the future and to if anybody family-wise or genetically is likely to get this. This is a genetic issue. And then if we have then got it in a child, and then how can we slow down that progression? The families that are here with me today and the families of the Friends of FOP would argue that they've got it, so they need help and the research now, but we also, and I know that they would like, what we need to do is have the research to actually prevent what's going on genetically. What worries me also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that while we need to spread knowledge around the world, not just in this country about FOP, because there are some parts of the world where there is almost no FOP babies being born. Just on the law of averages, that's not possible, and they've already proven that there is no cultural link. I mean, some genetic conditions are from what part of the world you might have come from. Apparently they've already done the research on this, that is not the case. So what is happening in parts of the world where babies, and as I said earlier on, they're not born deformed. So there's, I'm not saying that, you know, they instantly you know what's going on. So what is happening? And that sort of research desperately needs to be done. There's lots of work being done in Boston. There's lots of work being done around the world. But I think the key to this again now will be, we're back in as an associate of Horizon. Can we start not from scratch, but halfway through where we was before COVID hit the project? In a perfect world, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we would like, and the families would like, and we would all like in this room, to be able to press a button, perhaps give a tablet, and stop this progression. It is the most awful thing to be sitting there waiting for your child to perhaps have a bump or a bruise or a progression in this. Because as a group, and Friends of FOP make sure that everybody talks to everybody, because it's better learning from other people that are in the same situation as you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every 5 minutes. As I said earlier on, you're desperate not to wrap your child in cotton wool, to give them as much of a normal life as possible. And I was only talking earlier on with the chair of the Friends of FOP, who's playing badminton, his son has got FOP. I think he loses on a regular basis. So these things can be done, but as I say, the problem with the condition is it's not the same in every child. It's going to be different in every child, and it's different in its progression. So that's why this debate was so important. I thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting the debate. It would not be a normal sort of debate to be had. We've had a debate in Westminster Hall about this on the floor of the House, but it has such a dramatic effect on the lives and the futures and the aspirations and dreams of the families with FOP affecting their lives. I thought, and colleagues thought, some of them couldn't be here today, that we should bring it to the floor of the House so we could find out where this research is going. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Question is, as on the order paper. Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead for bringing this debate here to the Chamber, and for all the work that he's been doing to raise these important issues within Parliament. And it was good to hear such a fulsome and such a good description of the condition and how it affects people affected by FOP. And as chair of the Rare Disease All-Party Parliamentary Group, I am very glad to be able to take part in this debate to highlight the issues facing people with FOP. Now, we've heard, Mr Deputy Speaker, from the Honourable Member about just how debilitating this condition really is. Usually caused by a gene mutation, FOP is the only known condition where the body changes one organ to another. Bone forms in muscles, tendons and other connective tissues, progressively and irreversibly restricting movement. This severely limits the ability of those affected to perform the most basic tasks of daily life, so that children with FOP lose their independence just at the point they should be gaining it. Many of the issues affecting families of children with FOP are experienced by other people across the rare disease community, those long diagnostic odysseys that people... I will.
Interrupting so early in the speech, and she's generously given way. I think one of the bits I missed in my speech is that this is not a disease. And the work around rare conditions and diseases it's not a disease. It's actually a genetic condition. It's in the families. It's really important, I think, about this. Americans talk about this as a disease rather than a condition, but really and truly, this is a genetic condition that someone is born with, rather than something as a disease you will contract.
I thank the Honourable Member for making that clear, and you're right, to those families it is important. And sometimes in this House, even in our APPGs, we use kind of shorthand about issues that brings people together. It is indeed, as he said, a genetic condition. We do have some issues in common, as I was saying. Those long diagnostic odysseys. Just how long do people have to wait for their condition, I shall use that term, their condition to be recognised? There's a lack of clinical awareness as well of many of these conditions, and very limited treated options for far too many people. But FOP, as he has said, is perhaps one of the rarest and most disabling of these conditions, with currently no treatment or cure. Now, within the rare conditions community, a diagnostic odyssey, as he will know, refers to, as the Honourable Member will know, I should say, refers to a common scenario in which delays to accessing the right support and the right possible treatment where it exists can cause irreversible deterioration of an individual's condition. And while there is no treatment for FOP, repeated investigations, such as biopsies, can trigger its progression as the condition progresses, and it can be triggered by trauma as well. Furthermore, delayed diagnosis prevents parents from taking action to keep their children safe from situations and activities that could trigger injuries and flare-ups. Now, unfortunately, a diagnostic odyssey is the norm for many children with FOP. Getting a diagnosis takes 1.5 years on average, and more than half of people with FOP get the wrong diagnosis in the first instance, as we have heard. Despite genetic tests being available, FOP isn't included in the National Genomic Test Directory for rare and inherited conditions. So, can the Minister explain, Mr Speaker, why it's not included in the directory, and what plans the government has to change this position? Now, the real hope, as we've heard, for FOP is new research, which, like much of the research into rare conditions, would likely have far-reaching benefits for more common illnesses, such as osteoporosis, childhood brain cancer and heart disease. But at the moment, the government is overseeing a decline in research and international life science competitiveness, with commercial clinical trial activity in the NHS declining over recent years. We've heard from the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead about the Stop FOP trial, supported by funding from the EU's Innovative Medicines Programme as part of Horizon 2020. And isn't it ironic that we're discussing this on the day that we've heard that we are now in the Horizon programme, and thank goodness for that. It's an important move. But there have been 2 years of wasted opportunities and uncertainty for people like going through trials and research as people with FOP have been. So I understand that researchers would have to apply for new funding from the scheme in order to carry on with the Stop FOP trial. So I wonder, can the Minister say how the government will work to ensure that funding continues to be available, to allow the trials to continue, and to make sure that real progress is made in diagnosing and treating this condition? As the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead has said, time really is of the essence if we're not to lose the benefit of the work already done, and to give those with FOP and those who may be born with this condition in the future the very best chance of the earliest possible diagnosis and treatment.
Mr Deputy Speaker, it's a real pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead and the Honourable for Bladen for their contributions, and for the Honourable Gentleman in particular for setting the scene. It is very clearly a very rare condition. It is extremely rare, but it's really important that this matter is aired in the House, in this chamber, and the Honourable Member has done that extremely well. The Honourable Member is probably right that the Right Minister is perhaps not here. That's no disrespect to the Minister who is here, of course, because we know he's an honourable person and who will respond in a very, very positive fashion within his remit. But if it is another Minister that needs to perhaps take this on board, then we look to this Minister in person to make that persuasion to the Right Minister and hopefully have the response back. When the Right Honourable Member spoke to me about this and said to me would I come along to support him, first of all I automatically said I would, because it's a health issue, and that's one of my portfolios is on health issues, and I wanted to understand it. I've always had a particular interest, Mr Deputy Speaker, in rare diseases. I was long before I came here. I was a member of the Northern Ireland group of Association for Rare Diseases, so therefore it's a subject matter I'm particularly interested in. I knew little about this disease, I'll be honest. I had to research it, and the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, very clearly gave me some pointers now. But it was so informative to read about it and to learn about how rare it is and how little we just know about it. FOP is an exceptionally rare genetic condition where soft tissue develops into bone, creating a second skeleton. The Right Honourable Gentleman illustrated that very clearly in the bruise, the bump, or the jag, or discomfort. 70 known individuals are diagnosed in the UK. The disorder has been described to impact to 1 in a million. That gives you an idea how rare this condition really is. But this House is tasked, and we're tasked, with highlighting this issue and raising awareness. And hopefully today's debate will do that. As far as I'm aware, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are only 2 known cases in Northern Ireland. And they are 2 twin sisters. I don't have their permission to name them, and I wouldn't, but there's been public information on this case. I'm happy to give away, yes.
I think Brenna's touched on a really important point. The lack of diagnosis. If we know 1 in a million children are going to be born with it, so the calculation for the world population is pretty obvious, and we are nowhere near having the numbers that we know should be out there. And so the sad thing is, in my own constituency, in his constituency, or anybody else, honourable members of this constituency, we probably have got children that are going to be born or have been born with this, but the length of time it takes to get diagnosed, because the test isn't part of the programme, because it's possible to do that, that's the most important thing. If it's out there, it can be tested for if there's a will.
And the Right Honourable Gentleman has put forward a very simple request, perhaps it is, in that the diagnosis and the awareness can be raised just by the simple tests, which is so important to do. I understand, referring back to my referring to the twins, that they're keen to raise awareness of this issue, and rightly so. Often such rare diseases are ignored, and most people, like myself and like others before this debate, have little or no idea what it is, or more importantly, what we can do to raise awareness. But today we can use our positions as MPs in this House with the cooperation of the Minister and the Shadow Ministers to highlight this issue. I can't for a minute, Mr Deputy Speaker, imagine what it must be like to grow up with a condition where there's little or no information about it. Not to mention the time that the twins would have been children, there was no cure or treatment for this condition. And early and correct diagnosis is the only key, as the Right Honourable Gentleman refers to, the only key to changing a life of someone suffering with FOP. This debate is a request for that help, for that hope, for that progress, and hopefully we can gain that today on behalf of all our constituents. I understand the purpose of this debate is in relation to funding with the hope of a potential trial, and this is the best hope of trialling an existing drug, Zacarcanib. This was originally developed by AstraZeneca as a cancer drug. The underlying issue being that if stop FOP trial is not completed, the money spent on it will have been wasted. And with the progress of those tests and those trials and that advancement in medication and an examination of that as well, it's only right, I believe, that every effort should be made to try and find that money to ensure that the extra investigation to find the treatment is in place. I'm happy to give way.
Mike Penning.
You're giving way, I'm afraid. And I think there's other aspects, like all clinical trials and all things it seems to me, in health, there are other things it could help with. So while we're looking for on the clinical trials around this particular bone FOP disorder, it may be, I'm not a scientist, but maybe it's been put to me that there may be help around osteoporosis, brittle bones, skeletal damage, particularly military damage. That's the sort of area that actually, even though we're talking about a tiny percentage of the population here, the population with brittle bones is huge. And there's very little cure for it apart from taking more calcium tablets, seems to me. But if the research can be extended past FOP, so if we get the principle right on what's causing this bone growth, perhaps we can help millions of other people in other areas.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that. He's absolutely right. I mean, whatever trials that take place, there's always benefits found out. Maybe not the intended focus that perhaps maybe was set out there, but nonetheless, I think the focus can be larger and greater than that, and whether it be fibromyalgia, whether it be brittle bones, whatever it may be. I mean, this is originally a cancer drug, but it was found out to be beneficial for those with FOP. So yes, the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. As initial funding for this trial is running out, the main asks are to ensure that additional funding is allocated, whilst also ensuring that secure funding extends to allowing this trial to include children, and especially in relation to the screening of newborn infants, the very thing that the Right Honourable Gentleman has referred to. As mentioned earlier, Mr Deputy Speaker, many have said that early and correct diagnosis is the key to changing the life of someone with FOP. So I can't imagine how this trial could possibly not extend to newborns and those who are extremely young. Raising awareness is how we are going to improve treatment for this condition. But made aware that there are only 3 knowledgeable FOP clinicians in the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. This leaves patients often finding themselves treated by doctors with little or no FOP knowledge, which is rather disappointing, but it does perhaps focus attention upon those 3 clinicians in particular. Like other conditions, they must battle to be heard. Being aware of what to look out for is also crucial. Shortened or turned out toes in young children raises concern. But if this is contained or combined with tumour like swellings, FOP is almost certain. It has also been raised, Mr Deputy Speaker, that many patients are given biopsies and misdiagnosed for cancer. Others have had limb amputations, perhaps not the right way of going forward, but a response whenever you're not quite sure what it is you have in front of you. Having a better access to a wider pool of experts would make a huge difference in diagnosing and treating people correctly. The FOP Friends, that's a charity group based at Oxford, are fantastic in supporting families. I've also seen some of the social media pages of parents of children who have FOP, and the work that they're doing is totally and absolutely incredible. Absolutely, yeah.
Goodness, we've got plenty of time to debate this, Mr Deputy Speaker. So there was a petition as the honourable friend alluded to do with social media. Well over 100,000 people signed a petition. The government's response, and I should have mentioned this to the Minister, the government's response is that the government has funded research into FOP. I'm afraid it doesn't appear that is the case. It's into rare diseases, not into FOP. And that's probably quite crucial when it comes to actually the public's belief in what we do in this place.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention, and I know the Minister took note of what the right honourable member has said, and I'm quite sure that there will be a response along those lines, and I've no doubt at all, because we have a Minister here who has a genuine interest in a subject matter, and I hope we'll all be encouraged by what will have been said. I've also seen some of the parents of the main drivers in the campaign, and the effort going into this is truly incredible, and all these different people who are making the effort, whether the friends, FOP friends, will it be the families, will it be the clinicians, will it be those involved in the clinical trials, will it be ourselves as members of Parliament today, and ultimately the shadow ministers, and in particular the Minister. To conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank again the member for Hemel Hempstead for raising this issue with us today. He speaks so highly of his constituents, and he has, and he does all the time, by the way, but today he did it again, and he does it in a way, and I understand that, Mr Deputy Speaker, that he may not run again. At least he's indicated to me that's why he's not running again, so therefore we're going to miss his constant and compassionate commitments and interventions and speeches in this chamber. He doesn't always do what his own party wants him to do, but he always does what's right, and that's what I admire about him as an individual. So it's important that we do all we can to help those to cope with this condition. We must do more, I believe, to fund research into this trial, and I sincerely look forward to hearing of these developments in the future, and to give those with FOP a better quality of life. Just like the rest of us, we need government and the Minister, from whatever department that may be, to help those to deliver just that. Mr Deputy Speaker, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead for securing this debate. And I apologise at the very top if I stumble between illnesses, diseases and genomics. This is not my specialist subject. These rare illnesses are collectively widespread. There are thousands of different rare diseases and illnesses, and each one can require highly specialised treatment. This means that people living with the illnesses and the diseases can face the prospect of a long diagnostic odyssey before they're accurately diagnosed and able to access treatment. The various aspects of their treatment and care also often lack coordination. It's vital that we continue to strive for improvement and ensure that all those living with a rare disease get the right diagnosis faster, can access coordinated care and specialist treatment. The UK Rare Disease Framework was co-produced by the UK Government and devolved nations. The framework sets out the key priorities for the next 5 years in improving the lives of people living with rare diseases, and each nation committed to producing their own action plan based on how these key priorities will be implemented. The Scottish Government understands the importance of the framework and are committed to implementing the 51 commitments outlined within it. They also welcome the progress that has been made in Scotland in delivering genomic medicine and empowering patients through the UK Rare Disease Forum. In December 2022, the Scottish Government published the Rare Disease Action Plan. This action plan was developed through significant engagement with the rare disease community. Through the combined efforts, the Scottish Government will ensure that they are putting those lives with a rare disease at the heart of policy making, ensuring this meets the needs of the rare disease community in Scotland whilst reaping the benefits of a four-nation approach. The Scottish Government's action plan sets out 4 key themes in order to implement the UK Rare Disease Framework: ensuring patients get the right diagnosis faster, increasing awareness of the rare disease and among healthcare professionals, better coordination of care, and improving access to specialist care, treatment and drugs. The Scottish Government remains fully committed to ensuring that there is continual improvement in supplying patient-centric care that is safe and effective for those living with any rare disease. The genomic medicine landscape is developing rapidly. In the last 5 years, we have seen the implementation of impactful genetic testing for a variety of conditions. which has helped inform patient treatment, allowing patients to receive the right treatment at the right time. Pathogen genomics is also helping to deliver precision public health by guiding investigations of infections, outbreaks, antimicrobial stewardship, better targeted disease control and infection surveillance. The Scottish Government published Genomics in Scotland, Building Our Future in March of this year. The Scottish Government's strategic intent is to deliver an equitable, person-centred, population-based genomics service and infrastructure for Scotland. This publication is the first in a series setting out the Scottish Government's strategic vision for Scotland's genomics future. The Scottish Government will publish a series of documents in the future, setting out how they will deliver genetic services which will not only allow Scotland to treat disease, but prevent ill health before the prevalence of symptoms. Scottish physicians and scientists have been actively participating in the advancement of genomic medicines over the past 3 decades. Scotland is a great foundation to build upon within the NHS laboratory network, but it's important that these laboratories are fit for the future, as we know genomic medicine is on a steep trajectory. In order to achieve the Scottish Government's ambition of having a genomics ecosystem with the infrastructure to support it, it will require investment in rapidly evolving technologies, skills and facilities. The Scottish Government will be innovative and adaptive to change, working collaboratively through the triple helix approach with academia, industry and the public sector to harness the opportunities at their disposal and deliver an integrated approach to genomics across Scotland. The Genomics Strategy aligns with the Rare Disease Action Plan and will engage with the Rare Disease Implementation Board as well as key rare disease organisations like Genetic Alliance UK to ensure the strategy is informed by those who will benefit most. While I see the intent and acknowledge the money being spent, it's clear that far more money is required to fund the research that is needed. And this government's overspend tens of billions of pounds on MOD, on cross-sale, on HS2 and, ironically, PPE during a health crisis shows me the one thing: the money is there if we can access it and spend it wisely. In Scotland, following the 22-23 emergency budget review, genomics was allocated a revised budget of £5 million. Through the funding allocated so far in 22-23, the Scottish Government have established a Scottish Strategic Network for Genomic Medicine and funded a genomics transformation team with an NHS National Services Division led by consulting clinical scientists and supported by clinical leads for rare disease and cancer. Genomics medicine is an integral part of the precision medicine and precision health. It can enable earlier and more precise diagnosis, as well as more targeted prevention and management of diseases. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, over the next 5 years, the genomics landscape in Scotland will be transformed as we work to ensure that patients have equitable access to timely, personalised and high-quality genomic medicine for a range of conditions, which include FOP.
Opposition. Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it is a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'd like to thank the Backbench Committee for granting this debate and pay tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead, who secured the debate and who has tirelessly campaigned on this issue with his constituents, and the charity FOP Friends, who I understand have joined us today in the gallery. And I would like to pay tribute to the family's tenacity and bravery in raising the profile of this rare condition and continuing to do so. I'd also like to thank the members for Blaydon, Strangford and Clyde for being here this afternoon. And it is, isn't it, one of the great privileges of our role here that we learn from the experience, sometimes the really difficult and harrowing experience of our constituents. We learn from them on subjects that we might not ordinarily have come across. And I certainly have learnt much here looking into this debate and today. So I'm grateful that the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead has helped me understand, and I know he's worked with my office and other offices to make sure that we are all well informed today to understand the impact of the condition, and I think he did that really eloquently and powerfully today on their behalf. Because as we've heard, it is an ultra-rare condition affecting only 1 in 1 million and currently no cure. But we also know that what action can be taken that is effective both in diagnosis, and that's crucial, and care, and that people can live in general good health and reach older age, which I've been told is now over 60, and it's my birthday this week, Mr. Deputy Speaker, so that's quite close. So I don't think that's old age, but they can live certainly for quite some time. Early diagnosis is vital to manage progression of FOP, and the average age, as I understand it, is around 8 years of age. With those earlier signs, as we've heard, underturned big toes, but we can have much greater awareness. That would mean earlier diagnosis for children with FOP, and some comfort for families who perhaps might understand that something is not quite right to have that diagnosis. Young children, as we often know, are not particularly careful or robust, and it's not right to make them so. So whilst we also understand the dangers of immunisations into muscle, that all of that would be a positive step forward for FOP. 52% of people with diagnosis often receive an incorrect diagnosis, creating more delays in care, with swellings due to the flare-ups, often misdiagnosed, as I understand, as cancer or other diseases, which can lead to unnecessary and potentially harmful procedures. There is, as we've heard, a genetic test, which can, I will of course.
Thank you very much for giving way. I think at that point it's really interesting. So amputations have taken place. But the interesting thing is that you amputate the limb, but the damage to the muscle that has happened because of the amputation almost invariably goes straight back into turn into bone. So even though for the best will in the world, the surgeons will probably do, they don't amputate the limb just for the sake of it. But actually it's more damaging very often, and actually doesn't help the patient whatsoever. If anything, makes it worse.
Thank you again for that clarification and addition, because again it adds to that trauma, doesn't it, of what people are living with. However, the genetic test, which can confirm the diagnosis, and I think the Minister, we would expect to hear about that as to whether he's made any assessment on the inclusion of that test in the National Genomic Test Directory for Rare and Inherited Diseases. And given the commitments in the Rare Diseases Action Plan, it would be helpful, I think, for the Minister to outline what discussions he's had regarding newborn screening for FOP and the inclusion of digital education resources relating to FOP. As we've heard, with only 3 knowledgeable clinicians in the UK, access to information and guidance for all conditions would make a huge difference for those living with these conditions. Now, accepting that the Honourable Member for Colchester and myself are certainly the B team here today, and we would have been presented with scientists would have been preferable. There is an important issue around people living with the condition having good care to help people who may be immobilised by that at a fairly young age, because care for FOP and other rare diseases does need to be specialist, it's complex, and it does reach across the health and social care system. So I'm sure I can speak for the Honourable Member opposite that we are both very pleased to be here this afternoon talking about that impact on the wider health service. And we know, don't we, that we are very short of care staff more generally. That is not helpful for people who need the care and their families, and those living with this condition are vulnerable to some of those wider issues around the care service. And I do think it would be helpful for the government to be able to outline more support for this more generally around the workforce plan, which would include social care, because without an increase in the number of care workers, those living with rare diseases like FOP will struggle to get the care they need. That's why we think that that should happen. It would be helpful to hear from the ministers what steps the government are doing to support the care workforce with people living with this condition. Now, we've heard again that research is the greatest hope for those living with this condition, and the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead has argued passionately, as have others, for the need to continue to fund this Stop FOP trial. It's an incredible achievement to have raised that amount of money by the Friends of FOP, and the progress that has been made. And we know that research into it will also have benefits and implication, as we have heard, for more common illnesses such as osteoporosis, childhood brain cancer and heart disease. Now, we're all obviously really pleased to hear, after a very difficult and uncertain 2 years of unnecessary, frankly, negotiations to try and get us to this point, that we do now have involvement in Horizon programme. That has halted delays and collaboration into research, but we're very pleased to have that news today. And that will be really crucial to making some progress in this area. A key commitment in the Rare Diseases Action Plan is improving the Be Part of Research platform to make it easier for people living with rare diseases to participate in research should they choose to do so. So again, it'd be helpful to hear from the Minister what the government are doing to support those who wish to take part in the trial. And finally, FOP, as we have heard, can be devastating. Families want to live in good health and live their best life with their loved ones. And I want to give my heartfelt commendation to those living with this condition and their families. I'm pleased that people have come here today. I'm sure that visit to Downing Street was a really positive one. And the fact that we are debating it is a testament to their hard work and their commitment.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and let me start by thanking the Right Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead for securing this important debate on fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, which, alongside other Right Honourable and Honourable Members, I will refer to going forward as FOP, and of course for his powerful and compelling contribution. And as my Right Honourable friend very eloquently and articulately set out, FOP is an incredibly rare and truly devastating condition, and my Right Honourable friend is a champion for people living with this condition and their families, and I thank him for that. It is impossible, Mr Deputy Speaker, not to be moved on reading about and seeing the pictures my Right Honourable friend sent me about this currently incurable condition. And I'm sure that I speak for many in the House, in fact the whole House, when I say hearing about Lexi Robbins and her parents, Alex and David, greatly moved me, and I can only imagine what they must be going through, and I send my heartfelt sympathies to them and their entire family. I'd also like to express my admiration, Mr Deputy Speaker, for Chris and Helen Bedford-Gay, who established the charity FOP Friends after their son Oliver was sadly diagnosed in 2009. And I understand from my Right Honourable friend, Mr Deputy Speaker, that they've raised more than £700,000 since then to fund research into treatment and to support families impacted by FOP. And I'm sure that many, many families are incredibly grateful for all of their efforts. Now, at the outset, Mr Deputy Speaker, let me confirm that I am very happy to join my Right Honourable friend in meeting with the Science Minister on this issue. We already work hand in glove on matters of research. You'd expect nothing less, Mr Deputy Speaker. And let me also be remiss of me not to welcome the Honourable Lady for Bristol South to her place and congratulate her on her promotion on the front bench. I'd also like to thank the Honourable Lady for Blaydon and the Honourable Member for my friend, the Honourable Member for Strangford, for their constructive contributions and powerful contributions to this afternoon's debate. And I will endeavour, Mr Deputy Speaker, with your permission, to give as full and comprehensive a response as possible, given that we have far longer than any minister usually has to respond to a backbench business debate. Now, if I kick off with one specific question that the Honourable Lady for Blaydon asked about the National Genomic Test Directory, it was something I scribbled down at pace as she was speaking. My understanding, and I will check and write to her specifically to confirm, but FOP is a form of skeletal dysplasia, which is in the National Genomic Test Directory. But as I say, I will confirm that in writing once I've checked with officials on my return to the department. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to assure the House, and of course all families affected by rare diseases and conditions, of course, noting my Right Honourable Friend's point about FOP being a condition, it is a condition and disease phrase the department and clinicians often use together. We certainly recognise and understand the challenges that they face, and these diseases and conditions have wide-ranging impacts, not just on sufferers' physical health, but on their mental health, and of course also in their involvement in the community, as my Right Honourable friend set out. And that's why it's absolutely critical that those affected by this condition receive the very best possible care, from swift diagnosis to treatment, to improve the quality of life as diseases and conditions sadly progress. Now, to do this, it's vital that the UK harnesses our research prowess, and the debate today has largely focused around the power of research, and often it being the key to unlocking so much. And our universities, scientific institutions and our healthcare system very much lead the world in this space. We often say we're world leading in lots of areas, but research is certainly one area that we are, and they have enormous potential to develop solutions to improve the lives of people living with rare conditions, including FOP. And let me be really clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, the government is committed to funding this research. It's why in July the Medical Research Council and the National Institute for Health and Care Research announced £14 million of investment to launch the UK Rare Diseases Research Platform. And what that is doing is bringing together expertise from across the UK to foster new and innovative treatments for rare diseases and conditions, and to accelerate work to improve diagnosis. And what's more, Mr Deputy Speaker, the government is committed to funding groundbreaking research through nearly £790 million of new investment, again through the National Institute for Health and Care Research Biomedical Research Centres. And all of these, there's 20 centres, all of these centres have researched rare conditions, bringing together academics and clinicians with the role of translating scientific breakthroughs into potential new treatments, diagnostics and technologies. And I'm pleased to see, of course.
No, I'll wait.
Thank you very much. I thank the Minister for his comments about the UK rare disease funding. And that's very welcome, of course, and I'm particularly pleased to see that some of those centres are in Newcastle in the North East. That is, I think, really important, as I will discuss in my next debate, in the adjournment debate. But I wonder if you could say specifically about research into this condition, because that's what the families will want to hear.
The Honourable Lady literally preempted my next sentence, but let me give way to my right honourable friend before I continue.
I'll wait with interest in the next sentence, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I just say to the Minister that when I've been to Oxford and met many of the scientists that are doing the research into this, bidding for these sorts of funding is enormously complicated. It takes forever and a day to fill it in. A lot of time. Time is money when you're a scientific facility. And is there any way that it won't help FOP, because FOP doesn't fit into this category that he's referring to, because it is so rare, we have to do it across Europe or with the Americans and everything. But is there any way that we could simplify it so they can know earlier on whether or not they've got a chance of getting this funding, or they're wasting their time?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question and intervention. I think, given the complexity of the question that he raises, it's something that might be helpful if I respond in greater depth at the meeting that we have. And what I would say is, in having that meeting, I would invite Professor Lucy Chappell, who is the heads up the NIHR, who would be able to explain that process, because she is always looking at how we can improve routes to research and make it as easy as possible for researchers to come forward with fundable bids that the NIHR are then in a position to fund. Now, the Honourable Lady for Blaydon preempted my next sentence, which of course was going to be on FOP specifically, and I'm pleased to say that the government is funding dedicated research into FOP. And since 2010, the Medical Research Council has funded 3 projects relevant to FOP, and I will ensure that right honourable members get further detail on exactly what the government has funded. And in the last 5 years, the NIHR has supported 7 studies specifically into FOP. And as my right honourable friend referred to, the Biomedical Research Centre in Oxford has supported the Stop FOP clinical trial, which is exploring the safety and efficacy of using the new drug, which my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, referred to, saracatinib, to treat sufferers of FOP. And both the National Institute for Health and Care Research and the Medical Research Council welcome funding applications into any aspect of human health. And considering the challenges of designing trials for rare diseases. This is a point my right honourable friend rightly made. The efficacy and mechanism evaluation programme, which is funded by the NHR and the MRC, may suit researchers that are interested in FOP, as this looks to attract studies with novel methodology designs that can deliver results efficiently and quickly. Now, my right honourable friend and other members rightly referenced Horizon Europe. And I know my right honourable friend ideally wanted the Minister for Science to respond for this reason, but I would just reiterate that I do work incredibly closely with the Minister for Science because I have responsibility for all research funded by NIHR and through the department. And of course the NHS is a vehicle for so much of the research that happens. And as my right honourable friend rightly pointed out, Horizon Europe is a valuable platform for researchers from across the continent to come together to tackle shared challenges, especially in areas of this nature where the number of patients affected or certainly diagnosed is very small. And it has been an important source of funding, as my right honourable friend set out, for research into rare diseases and conditions, including the STOP FOP study. And as my right honourable friend alluded to, we have been negotiating the UK's continued involvement in the programme, and I'm delighted to say that as of this morning, such is the timeliness of this debate, that the Prime Minister announced the successful conclusion of these negotiations with a bespoke deal in our national interest, as the Secretary of State set out in a statement to the Commons earlier today. And as of today, and this is to my right honourable friend's specific point about how quickly research can be stood up, UK researchers can apply for grants and bid to take part in projects under the Horizon Europe programme, and they can do so, Mr Deputy Speaker, with certainty that the UK will be participating as a fully associated member for the remaining life of the programme to 2027. Of course.
I really do thank the Minister for giving way, and this is a learning process for all of us, and not just about FOP, but also, as I understand Horizon go out, they to ask for bids on certain aspects. Then you have to bid if that you fit into that criteria, and then you have to wait sometimes up to 2 years to run it. So for the FOP project which had stopped because of COVID, to start again over that would be really very, very difficult. So I wonder if the Minister would join me in our meeting to see if we can slot in rather than start at the front.
Right honourable friend for his intervention, and again he has preempted what I was about to say next, and I listened intently to my right honourable friend's question to the Secretary of State during the statement earlier, where he secured a meeting with the Minister for Science, and of course I would be very happy to join that meeting, because I share with him the view that if there is an opportunity for that research to be continued, we certainly don't want to see it starting from scratch. And I know at the moment, my understanding is that research only relates to adults. Yes. And my right honourable friend, understandably and rightly, would like that to be extended to children also. So I'm very happy to join that meeting. Now, Mr Deputy, let me turn to the next step, to the steps the government is taking to tackle rare diseases and conditions more broadly. In 2021, we published the UK Rare Diseases Framework, and this embodies our commitment to build a brighter future for people living with rare diseases and conditions. And the framework identified 4 key priority areas. So they're helping patients get a faster diagnosis, increasing awareness of rare diseases, something I know that my right honourable friend is particularly passionate about amongst healthcare professionals, delivering more coordinated care, and of course alongside that improving access to specialist care, treatment and drugs. And since then, as was alluded to by the Honourable Member for Inverclyde, all 4 nations of the United Kingdom have published rare disease action plans to suit their healthcare systems, and we very much work and have to work in collaboration on this. And in England, we published our 2nd Rare Disease Action Plan in February of this year, which of course also marks International Rare Diseases Day. And in that, we set out 13 new actions to drive improvements across the health system, and we are committed to action plans throughout the lifetime of the framework. Now, I touched on awareness of FOP and rare conditions and diseases more broadly, because my right honourable friend, the member for Hemel Hempstead, rightly highlighted how a lack of awareness of FOP in the medical community can lead to underdiagnosis, misdiagnosis, and sadly also unnecessary examinations which can sadly also exacerbate symptoms. That's why improving healthcare professionals' awareness of rare diseases and conditions is absolutely central to the rare diseases framework. And I'm very pleased to inform the House, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we are making good progress in this regard. NHS England have developed G-Notes, which is an online resource which puts information about genetic diseases and conditions at the fingerprints or at the fingertips of healthcare professionals. And I'm pleased to tell the House that resources dedicated to FOP will be added to G-Notes, and that will help more clinicians to diagnose this awful condition, and that sufferers will receive the treatment that they need more quickly. Now, lastly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, turning to newborn screening. Now, my right honourable friend has raised this with me privately. The Honourable Lady for Bristol South also raised newborn screening for FOP. And where both are absolutely right, antenatal and newborn screening can be a vital tool in the early diagnosis of rare diseases. And national screening programmes are implemented on the advice of the United Kingdom National Screening Committee, which makes independent, evidence-based recommendations to ministers in all 4 nations. And whilst there are currently no plans, as I understand it, for a national newborn screening programme specifically for FOP, I would like to highlight, Mr Deputy Speaker, that proposals for new conditions can be submitted to the National Screening Committee's annual call for new topic. Of course.
Way. And just on this issue of newborn screening, is the Minister aware that there is a concern among the rare disease community about the limits of our newborn screening process? This is something that we're actively speaking about at the moment. We think there are options for that to be expanded in a positive way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I've heard this from other charities, groups and organisations representing rare diseases and conditions, and I think that it's absolutely right that we respect the independence of the National Screening Committee, who do put forward to ministers evidence-based decisions, but nevertheless it's important that we listen to those organisations that are making very valid cases. I'm also concerned about the length of time that the National Screening Committee can take to make decisions and review evidence and present recommendations to ministers. So in our meeting, I think we should probably, I'd be very happy to discuss that issue at greater depth and length. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, in closing, let me once again thank my right honourable friend, the member for Hemel Hempstead, for securing today's hugely important debate, and in particular securing it on the floor of the House of Commons chamber. I would like to express my heartfelt support for the entire FOP community, those living with the disease, their carers, their families, the clinicians, and the charity FOP Friends, who I know work tirelessly to improve the lives of people affected by this devastating condition. I reiterate my thanks to all members for shining a light on this condition this afternoon. I very much look forward to our meeting and discussing this further, and I genuinely believe that together we'll continue to strive for progress, awareness and support those living with FOP.
So Mike Penning to wind up.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. What an excellent debate we've had this evening. I apologise if I was in any way rude to the 2 front benches about that I'd prefer the Science Minister. I'll have the Science Minister later now, so that's perfectly okay. So I'm really very, very grateful to the Minister, and I think he has set out some things that we didn't know, and so we'll especially around that. On screening, look, if we know early, we will save the NHS money. And I know there's an independent body that looks at rare diseases and conditions, but actually the earlier in this particular life-changing condition, life-shortening condition, aspiration and dreams of parents are changed dramatically, but they're also changed dramatically the earlier they know. Because it's earlier they know that we can get friends of FOP helping them because they've been through it. And the more we can screen, the more we're going to find, because we know the figures don't show that we've got enough people actually not that we know about, because the 1 in 1 million doesn't work that way. The more chance we've got of getting consultants that specialise in this area rather than the 3 we have, and the more active we are in this area, the more scientists are going to want to come to this country and work at Oxford with the team there and other teams. That means that there is a future for the families that are so badly affected. I am enormously grateful to the House and the Backbench Business Committee for actually granting the debate on a subject which most people freely admit they knew absolutely nothing about until bits of paper from my office came across. I want to thank particularly John Mole from my office, who has actually contacted nearly everybody's office and said, what more do you need, including the fruit bunching, because I think it's really important that we did have that knowledge. And I remember saying to the other one, have you given that to Sansa? Yes, it's already gone. So for instance, the letter to the Prime Minister this morning, I know the Minister got, I was told 5 minutes before I came in the chamber that you got it already. So the key to that, there was a lovely moment outside number 10 with the families and the affected children and young people there. Little Lexi handing the letter into the number 10 door was a very moving moment, and let's hope the ministerial meetings that we're going to have and the great news about partnerships in Europe rather than being run by Europe is a really important thing, particularly with Horizon. You knew I'd get that in. And actually the nations of this country, of this great parliament we have here, coming together and saying we need to do something about something that affects so few people, but could actually, in the scientific research, actually affect lots of our families and help them in the future as well. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Question is as on the order paper. As many of that have been say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Liz Truss.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And what a coincidence to have one debate about rare conditions followed by another. But I'm very pleased, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to have secured this debate on skills provisions for new cell and gene therapies. Now, the emergence of new cell and gene therapies, sometimes known as advanced therapies, offers real hope for patients with rare and genetic conditions. Many of these patients have so far faced limited treatment options and endured great challenges associated with managing the conditions long term. But by using the power of human biology, cell and gene therapies can address the root causes of diseases rather than just their symptoms, preventing disease progression and even saving lives. In many cases, a single one-time treatment